Well, good morning. It is Friday morning, and again, you are getting everything by way of video this morning. Um, I believe we got someone here to make sure folks are present. And what we're going to do is we're going to start on chapter 17 today. Just like we did yesterday, I'm going to lecture for about an hour. When video finishes, we'll have about a 15-minute break. And then what we'll do is from there, then we will have another about video, hour long video. And then I will dismiss class, allowing you the opportunity to go to a computer lab. Again, let me emphasize, I would not use my cell phone to do the quizzes on, just because the reliability between cell phones and Canvas do not always work right. So just be mindful of that. But chapter 17 starts with the East Asian world. And we will be looking at China right off the bat. And the book starts off with in 1514. And it talks about a Portuguese fleet dropping anchor there in the area around Hong Kong. Hong Kong is going to play a major factor in this area, not just in the early 1500s. Hong Kong today plays a major factor in the world economy. If you know anything about economics, if you're an economics major, you know that one of the biggest, pardon me, one of the biggest stock exchanges is in Hong Kong. So just be mindful of that. But in 1514, a Portuguese fleet dropped anchor there right outside of Hong Kong. And what you're going to have is this is going to be the first major meeting between the West being Europe, and the Chinese Empire. Matter of fact, this is going to be the first interaction between the two entities since Marco Polo had actually came there in the 1300s. In doing this, we wonder how in the world that how China pardon me, how China becomes a major world player. China for the longest was very isolationist. They didn't want any interaction with the outside world. And when this expedition comes here in the 1500s, it's going to open up a lot of opportunities, and that will lead to what we see going on now. We talked about Marco Polo, and I'm not talking about the pool game. When Marco Polo visited China, it was under the leadership of Kublai Khan, who was probably one of the greatest Mongol leaders of that time. However, and with when he visited there, Kublai Khan was part of what we call the Yuan, Yuan dynasty. That dynasty will end in 1368. 1368. You had a peasant rebellion that was led by, pardon me just a second, let me grab my glasses because my eyesight's not being real good today. Under the leadership of Zhu Yuang, Zhu Zhuang, and what he establishes as a dynasty is called the Ming Dynasty, or the Bright Dynasty, and that the Ming Dynasty is going to last from 1369 to about 1644. Under the Ming Dynasty, you're going to have uh, China's going to expand territory wise. It's going to go into Central Asia. It's going to go southward toward Vietnam. Matter of fact, they are actually going to explore into the Indian Ocean right there. But as fast as they go out, you're going to see the empire come back in on itself, almost implode, because you're going to have economic strife going on. So, the leader at that time, Emperor Yongle, is going to move the capital to Beijing, and part of his moving the capital there, he is going to institute a major building program. And that building program is going to include what we now call the Imperial City. It was the Imperial City, the Imperial Palace, and such as that is all going to rest upon the grounds of where Kublai Khan actually had his palace when he was in charge. Now, we talked about how that the naval operations under the Ming Dynasty suddenly pulled back from the Indian Ocean. You're going to still see that China is a large area. China's a large area, and I'm not meaning to sound like I'm reading from the book, but I am referring to the book as far for the data. Empire-wise, it's going to go from Central Asia all the way to the China Sea, all the way from the Gobi Desert to Southeast Asia. So when you have the Portuguese coming in here, they thought they were going to be encountering barbarians, is the word the book uses, barbarians, folks that are not educated as well. But it was actually the Chinese who viewed the Europeans as less cultured, just the way they came in there with their insistence upon their properties and such as that, their rights and such. The Chinese got mad with them and they kicked the Europeans out. And the Portuguese back up, regroup, and start in with a new proposal. They come up there and they say, hey, we're not trying to come in and run the show. Just give us a small area. And the small area that they were allowed was the area of the territory of Macau, which was along the coast there in South China. And the Portuguese actually maintained that territory right there until the latter part of the 20th century, the last century that we just came out of. But the Portuguese, they are going to do their best to involve the Chinese in trade. They're going to set up trading networks where that they carry silk from China to Japan. If you know anything about the history right there, there is no love lost between China and Japan. But with the Portuguese acting as an intermediary, well, what you have here is the ability of these folks to interact with each other. The Chinese send silk to Japan, and as payment, Japan sends back silver to China. So it's a win-win for all parties involved. Well, folks see this good cooperation between the Chinese, Japanese, and the Portuguese. Well, other countries are going to see that and they want to get involved. And what they do is you have Spain. Spain wants to get involved, and they do. But instead of being between Japan and China, they're taking Chinese goods and actually selling them in South America, and in North America to a degree. As we see so many times with the European explorers, as the economics grow and everything, so follows the church. And when I say the church, I'm talking about the Catholic Church. I'm not speaking ill of them. I'm just using that as a historical fact. The Jesuits are generally the ones that carry out the missionary activities of the Catholic Church. Well, the Jesuits are not stupid. They are educated. They understand scientific innovations. They are trained in philosophy. And one of the things that the Jesuits used to garner the the good feelings between themselves and China is the use of science. Matter of fact, the Jesuits were able to use science to forecast solar eclipses. Why is that relevant? Because under with the Chinese, they always viewed solar eclipses as being a religious activity, an event. Well, how in the world do you, if you're an outside religion, you're a Christian trying to evangelize an outside entity? Well, what the Jesuits did was they took what the Chinese already knew. The Chinese already knew the teachings of Confucius. Well, what the Jesuits did was take the teachings of Confucius and compare them to the teachings of Jesus Christ, the foundations of Christianity, and drew the parallels and said, hey, there's not much difference. Why don't you think along the lines with us? One concept that they had to convey to the Chinese, the Jesuits did, was the concept of God. So that is a major part of it right there. Also, how else do you do that? Well, if you know anything about Confucian teachings, it's big on ethics. Well, what they took was the ethical teachings of Confucius, again, looking at the moral teachings of Christianity, and drew the parallels there. And because of all this interaction between the science and the religion and drawing the parallels and such, they were able to garner an audience there at the Imperial Palace, everything. And one of the things that actually were able to allow the Jesuits to gain favor, that right there, glasses. Think about this, and I haven't met any of y'all yet, but if you can't see, and I was having problems reading this, and somebody hands you a pair of glasses and you put them on, and you go, and I can read, an elderly Chinese scholar expresses wonder at the miracle of eyeglasses, and he writes this retort down. And he said, I could see the very tips of things and read fine print by the dim lit window just like in my youth. If you go from where you can't see to where you're seeing fine print, do you think that would garner good relations? Most definitely. Most definitely. Well, as we said in yesterday's lecture, history is not a flat line. History has its ups and its downs, okay? It's up and it's downs. You have strong leaders. You have weak leaders. You have in-between leaders. There's no middle ground right there. Well, the Ming are going to go through a series of weak leaders that the ones around them become very corrupt. Very corrupt. Also, you're going to see part of the folks there, because of this weak leadership, you're going to see land grabbing, where folks that just garner up all the land, and the haves have and have-nots don't. Well, if you ain't got something and you need something, how many times do we see throughout history rebellions? The peasants, they don't have any land to grow anything. They don't even have a land to grow a tomato plant so they can have a tomato sandwich. And that's going to cause a lot of unrest, a lot of ill feelings. Remember, we talked about just a minute ago that how the Portuguese and the Spanish were acting as middlemen between the production there in China and the selling of goods either in Japan or in the Americas. And they get paid by silver, and silver comes back. Well, I hate to tell you this, but I want you to think about it. Can you eat silver? No, you can't. Now, you've got a high influx of silver that nobody can eat. You got land grabbing going on where folks can't produce. You start seeing something that we're dealing with right now. Inflation, everything. Folks have money at this time. The haves have silver. But if there's nothing there for them to buy, then guess what? What is available will be able to be brought in, and at whatever price somebody deems is a valid price. Well, you've got, as I said, Portugal and Spain involved there. Well, what happens when you have England, France, other European countries, the Dutch? They start acting basically like pirates. They start raiding the ships of the Portuguese and the Spanish. And now you're having major problems economically economically. You start seeing scarcities of commodities. Uh, Food's not going to be able to be present. You're also going to see the government do this, and heaven forbid, you're going to learn one thing in this class: history repeats itself. Because the old saying, those who do not study history are apt to repeat it, don't understand that if you keep doing things the same way over and over and over, you're going to get the same results. That's the definition for insanity. That if you do the same thing over and over and over and over, you're going to get the same results. Nothing's going to change. Well, you've got high inflation. You've got no food. Well, I get hungry, y'all. Ain't y'all ever got hangry? Yeah. Why? When you're hungry, your emotions are out there and everything. And folks don't want to be hungry. And I promise you, if I'm hungry enough, I will fight you over a sandwich. And I don't think anybody in here wouldn't. I don't think any of us are that docile. So you start getting unrest like that. Well, when outside folks, like from the other side of the Gobi Desert, they start seeing that unrest happen, what do? They figure, hey, this is easy pickings. And they just swoop in and come in like that. So the Manchus come in from the north. The book says that they actually lived northeast of the Great Wall of China in an area called Manchuria. And we still have that on maps today. And the Manchus, once they get that small base there in northern China, they start building on it. But again, you see history repeat itself, because you're fixing to have a major epidemic. Well, what we get called a pandemic. We just lived through, 3 years ago? Folks get upset. You have uprisings. Well, during this, you're going to have the Ming Dynasty be overthrown. And during this overthrow, you're going to see the Manchus attack Beijing. And what happens is they start a new dynasty. The Ming Dynasty is gone, and they start what is called the Qing, Qing, Qing Dynasty. The word Qing means pure. Now, and we think of history as being long ago, and to some of y'all this is going to seem long ago. But the Qing Dynasty is going to last actually from 1644 all the way to 1911, at the beginning of the World War I era. But it should be noted that the Qing Dynasty are not homegrown Chinese. They are foreigners. So for a better part of 300 years, you're going to see foreigners leading China. Now, when we talk about that, the Qing Dynasty here, they want folks to adhere to what they believe, what they want going on. Okay? They want the Chinese to dress like them, to act like them. Um, and one of the things, if you look at some of the older movies, the westerns and such, um, I'm I'm showing my age when I say this, but shows like Bonanza or the old movie McClintock and everything, where the Chinese characters there, where they have the forehead shaved up to like right here, shaved right there. You have that. That was part of it. Was that shaved forehead, and you would see them with a long braided ponytail called a Q. Q-U-E-U-E, a Q. And if somebody did not dress the way the Manchus did not wear their hair the way they did, um, they could be executed. They could be executed. Um, One of the popular sayings during that time says, "Lose your hair or lose your head." It's kind of hard to believe that if I didn't shave my head up to here and have a long ponytail, that I could get killed by the state. Now, the Jin dynasty is going to be led by some very strong individuals. Uh, Kangxi is going to be one of their strong leaders. Zhenglong, Zhenglong, they ruled together for over a century and were responsible for much of the success, the book says. If you look at the rule of Kangxi, he ruled from 1661 to 1722. Many historians argued that Kangxi was the greatest ruler in Chinese history. He was a learned man. He was a patron of the arts. He emphasized scholarship within his um, administration. He was very tolerant when it come to outside religion. Um, we talked about the evangelistic arm of the Catholics being the Jesuits. You're also going to get branches of the Catholic Church, including the Dominicans and the Franciscans. And matter of fact, Kangxi is going to tolerate these folks being in. My PowerPoint went away. That's why I leaned up, folks. But under the leadership of Kangxi, they are tolerated even to the point that they begin to exert influence over the emperor's court. It says several hundred of his officials converted to Christianity. It said also 300,000 ordinary Chinese converted to Christian. Only problem is you're fixing to have a major fight because folks can't get along. Folks can't get along. Especially whenever it comes to religion. Well, Kangxi dies there in 1722. He is followed by Yongzheng, who rules from 1722 to 1736. And then you have Zheilong, who is going to take over. And Zhejiang rules from 1736 all the way to 1795. Zhejiang is very much like Kangxi. He is tolerant. He is curious. He is trying to expand his knowledge base. So he questions everything. He is a military genius. He knows that he cannot let the tribes on the frontier get a foothold. Only problem is he forgets the fact of that military conquests are going to cost him money, and they get very expensive. Well, as he ages, he doesn't vet his the folks under him as well. So he winds up with folks that do not do the job as well. Matter of fact, you see corruption start to come into this. As he's not vetting these folks well, you see them imposing higher taxes. You fix to see more bureaucracy that just gets in the way and such. Does anything sound familiar? It sounds like I'm reading from the day's headlines on newspapers and such, because these folks are doing the same things that we have done. Everything. You're going to see a population increase. Well, you got to be able to feed the folks there and everything. So you're going to see pressure on the land, and because of that, you're going to see economic hardship. And when folks aren't eating, when they aren't getting what they need, you're fixing to see another rebellion. And this is called the White Lotus Rebellion. But just because it's a rebellion does not mean that it goes over well. It takes a toll on the society. The expenses that go along with it, because you make folks aggravated, you make folks mad, and they aren't able to be as adaptive. Now, the Manchus were very adaptable for the most part. They were able to keep the political society that was already in place there. You're going to see them become not segregated from the original Chinese people, but you're going to see that segregation, whether you want to admit it or not. That just happens because of the nature of the beast. They became ethnically, linguistically, and culturally different from their subject population. It said that the Manchus only made up 2% of the population, and they're trying to govern the other 98%. They do understand that they have to have a defense force, and that defense force is of the homegrown folks, and they organize them into groups called banners. And the banners were, as the book describes it, the primary fighting force for the empire. So you have that going on. The Manchus did understand that this: when you are appointing folks to have positions in government, you don't want to just give that to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. What they did figure out was that they had to advance the smartest. Well, some of the smartest were actually native Chinese. And they're going to wind up with a system where that you have Manchus and native Chinese working side by side in government. This is called a diarchy. Dyarchy. A diarchy. We talk about different influences on the peoples. One of the outside influences is going to come from the north, Russia. Russia and the Chinese, it's always been kind of iffy with them. They tried to have relationships, but I don't think either one of them trust the other one enough to fully join in. The Ming Dynasty had tried to do that. Under the Ming Dynasty, you had a system of tribute where that the Chinese expected the Russians to pay. However, if you know anything about Russian czars, the czar said basically go booger you, and give them the middle finger and said, nope, we're not going to play by your rules. Matter of fact, whenever the Chinese emissaries went into his court, it was a common practice where that the Chinese bow at the waist and that it is reciprocated. Well, the Russian emperor, Russian czar, again basically said booger you, and refused to kowtow. Kowtow, Kawtow, kowtow. This is where that you touch your forehead, you're kneeling and you touch your forehead to the ground before the ruling monarch. So, the Russians and the Chinese will enter into a formal treaty, so they have relations. This happens in 1689 when you have the Treaty of Nerzinsk. It set the border between China and Russia, allowed for trade between the two entities. But, and because of these treaties and this trade, now the Qing dynasty is able to move into Tibet, down to their west and to their south. So they've dealt with the Russians. I'm sorry, having to resituate, folks. It's always fun trying to sit down here for a while. But when you have the outsiders coming in, China was constantly having to figure out how to deal with them. The English, the Portuguese, they're all coming in there. The English are actually going to displace the Portuguese from China as being the major trading force. The English set up their first trading post there in China at Canton in 1699. They're going to learn that Chinese tea, Chinese silk, going to Great Britain drew a pretty penny. So hey, they're good for that. The Chinese, on the other hand, did not want European goods. They viewed it a lot of times as um, defective, less than what optimum. So you have that. However, the Qing dynasty did not want a lot of interaction between the British and the common folks. So only licensed trading Chinese trading firms could come to Canton and do interaction with the Europeans. And matter of fact, the Qing dynasty confined the Europeans to a small island. Now, you heard me say a while ago that China exported a lot of goods, but they did not import a lot of goods. Yes, you get the silver from your goods being built, being bought, but therein lies the problem. A lot of folks want that reciprocated. Well, China wasn't reciprocating. Um, they were not buying British goods. Well, the British said, "Hey, you really need to buy our stuff." And when the leader right there, Lord Macartney, visited Beijing in 1793, he tried to get them to let up on some of the trade restrictions. Hey, y'all need to buy from us. We're buying from you at a high rate. You need to buy from us. And when he entered into the court, remember, you're entering into the presence of the emperor. Well, the first thing is you walk into a monarch's room, and this is worldwide. Everything you walk into a monarch's room, they expect you to pay homage to that person to show that the leader is the one worthy of honor. Well, Lord Macartney would not bow. Remember, we talked about the kowtow, your own bended knee and your forehead actually touches the ground. Well, Lord Macartney wouldn't do that. He made the statement that the only one that he bowed to was the British monarch. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. So they had to strike a compromise. If I can get the right words out today, I'll be doing better. But strike a compromise between his actions and the emperor. So he finally is able to come into the emperor's court with simply a bent knee. He only had to bend one knee. All right, so we look at China and we look at them, they are primarily an agricultural country. According to this, it says 85% of the population at the time that we're talking about were actually farmers. 85%. Well, and the population has moved around here in China. You're going to see the economics move from north to south. And much of the activity is going to be located along the Yangtze River. The Yangtze River. Well, the reason why you're going to see a lot of the agricultural movement down there at the Yangtze River is, if you know anything about rivers, when it rains, they flood. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing all the time, because in floods you get nutrients brought into the soil, and folks that could grow crops there in the area around the Yangtze River were able to grow food, and therefore send that food throughout the empire like that. But also, when it comes to food, you got to have enough to feed the folks. It amazes me. It said that in 1800, I'm sorry, in 1800 the population was 300 million. 400 years ahead of that, 1390, there was only 70 million. So understand that the population in 400 years triples. Triples. Uh, when folks try to figure out, well, why in the world it tripled like that? Well, you got peace going on, there's stability in the country. Those things work well. Now, you've got to feed folks. Folks are hunting land. Uh, and as families get bigger, because if you think about it, your mom and your daddy, they have youngins. Well, they might can feed themselves, mom and daddy, but what happens when they get a youngin, or two youngins, or three, or whatever? Mouths stay open. And the Chinese are figuring this out, that you're having to feed more and more with less and less. Well, when you worry about such things, then you have you're also going to see industrialization. Uh, wood products are going to be made. Porcelain, cotton goods, cotton, tobacco. All of this is going to be, in addition to the tea and the silk and the porcelain that was already being traded elsewhere. Now, the merchants in China, they did not have it as well as, say, Europe and everything. The state had control over the economy. So you have that instance. Okay? So, and when the state's involved, you can always guarantee on one thing: taxes. Always figure on taxes. When we look at their religion, remember we talked about the ethics. That's the teachings of Confucius. Well, you're going to see something called Neo-Confucianism, where that you investigate things to emphasize moral principles. So these are things that are going on. When we look at the living conditions there in China, it was nothing unusual about having 3 or 4 generations up under one roof. You'd have grandparents, parents, unmarried daughters, all under the same roof. The Chinese understood you had to have big families to be able to feed. Well, if you got to have big families, that means you got to have a lot of food. So you had that going on. Sons, whenever they got old enough, they didn't have much employment. They had to stay at the house. So the house is getting steadily fuller. The oldest male in the house, be it grandpa, be it daddy, be it the oldest son, they make the rules, and the rest of the family have to follow it. They could arrange marriages, and they arrange marriages simply for the fact of being able to uh, hopefully help the family out. It was not unusual for spouses to have never met each other until their wedding night. Um, you have the fathers were expected to provide for the families. Um, and with this many folks up under the um, same roof and everything, you see the beginning of clans and everything, family groups, large family groups. Some that extended to hundreds of family members, everything. But when we look at it, women were inferior. Women were inferior. Um, Women should be seen and not heard. Women should be seen working in the fields. They should be cooking. They should just be there. Um, the husband, the father, carried on the religious activities. You wanted male children. Females were viewed as less desirable. Having females was viewed as less desirable. If you had daughters, you had to pay a dowry to the young man's family for as they would view it, taking their problem off their hands. Here, take my problem. Everything. So we have that. Okay. With that being said, we're going to take a short break, about 15 minutes. Stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, and we'll be back and we'll finish up the second half of this chapter.